So as people are slowly moving towards the front, I just wanted to share a little bit about my background. My current role is I'm the Executive Director responsible for policy and programs in the Manitoba Civil Service Commission. Prior to that, I've worked in a number of roles with Crown corporations in private sector as well as roles in government. My most current role, I'm responsible for human resource policy for the Manitoba government in a number of our development programs as well as our staffing practices. And our goal is really to look at improving the efficiency of human resources with the goal of improving service delivery through government and also to the public. The Civil Service Commission is an organization responsible for human resource management for the Manitoba government. So government is an organization with about 15,000 employees distributed throughout the province. About 40 to 45% of our workforce is located outside of Winnipeg, which is our main urban center. And we have a range of occupations, from trades to professional, from mining inspectors to the people who patch holes on the roads, and a little bit of everything in between. So today's focus is looking at practical approaches to integrating the recognition of prior learning principles into any organization's human resource practices, and looking at it from a couple of different angles. Looking at it from the perspective of recruitment, accommodation, from learning and development, as well as performance management. I know a number of you are looking at this material not only for your own organizations per se, but also for the clients that you work with, in supporting them achieve whatever outcomes that they are looking to achieve, which may relate to employment. So I'm going to encourage you to think about not only how you might be able to bring some of these practices back to the administration of your own organizations, but also how you might be able to help inform some of the employers in the areas or the industries that you connect with as to how they might be able to better serve the needs and interests of your clients. I'm not really going to spend too long talking about RPL principles. You guys are the expert in the room. It's more so recently I've been told that some of the HR practices that we were using because they made business sense were actually RPL, and it was just like, oh, well, that's good to know. It came as a bit of a pleasant surprise. Just talking about some of the rationale for an employer to be interested in looking at RPL as a good business practice. I'm going to start things off with statistics because everyone loves statistics on a Monday morning. I promise you the presentation isn't completely loaded in statistics, so bear with me for the next couple of minutes. So looking at labor market projections, looking at close to 1 out of 4 people in the labor force is projected to be 55 years or over by 2021, which is a significant change where the proportion was about 17% in 2010. The participation rate is also dropping to around 60% in 2031, which is a level that hasn't been seen since the 1970s. And by 2031, about 1 in 3 people in the labor force could be born outside of Canada, with a higher proportion in Ontario and British Columbia. So our changing demographics are putting pressure on the labor market. And as workers retire and there are fewer people to replace them, there's an upward pressure on wages, adjustments, and the composition as well as the nature of the labor force. Just from a Manitoba context, we welcomed over 10,000 economic immigrants in 2012. With work experience reflecting over 400 different occupations. And as you well know, there's a lot of obstacles for newcomers to find work in the profession. Why is this important for employers? Canada's economy is growing, and along that come with challenges for organizations given some of those demographic pressures that I just talked about. Employee turnover is something that's also changing. You see increases in employee turnover over the last number of years, where employees are more likely to work for several organizations throughout the course of their career. In the first 10 years of my career, I think I worked for 8 or 9 different employers. And compared to individuals who may have spent their entire career with an employer from the moment that they graduated from high school or from university to the moment that they retired. So that has increased competition for skilled workers now that employees essentially are in demand and employers are having to do better things to be able to attract and retain them. Globally, human capital is one of the top challenges identified by CEOs, and this has been a trend that we've continued to see 77% of Canadian CEOs say that creating a skilled workforce is one of their organization's top priorities. And 63% are talking about the availability of skills being a concern for their organization. We do often hear about a skills gap in Canada, and this is something I'm certainly not an expert in. Labor market trends and development is not my field of expertise, but one of the things that I have seen is that may contribute is that employers don't do a very good job of articulating exactly what they need. And they don't do a great job of necessarily recognizing the skills that are available in the labor market today. And we're finding that Canada needs skills of all levels and of all kinds, and those need to be valued if the country is going to remain competitive. One other trend that I noted that's a little bit of a concern is that just over 30% of Canadians participated in some kind of non-formal job-related training, where we were ranked towards the bottom of peer-ranked countries. And they're saying that this kind of trend connects to our, well, I don't know if abysmal is the right word, but our very low productivity rates, because well-trained workers tend to do their jobs more efficiently and have the ability to innovate and take those organizations forward. So thinking about, first of all, from a recruitment perspective, what we encourage our managers, our hiring managers to do is start by analyzing the job. Identify more so the desired outcomes of the job, as opposed to necessarily the methods necessary or the methods that have been used to carry out that job. And look at describing what the knowledge, skills, and abilities are essential to perform that job. And when I say knowledge, skills, and abilities, other organizations may call them competencies, they may call them qualifications. We tend to use the term knowledge, skills, and abilities in part because competencies has had a bad organizational implementation of a project called competencies, and now it kind of has that negative miasma in the organization. Another important element is looking at not being too specific in terms of the tools and methods being used on the job. We do a lot of work, and we've been working hard to recruit candidates and employees with disabilities. And this has really been important for us to encourage applications and also to help assessing any accommodation requests. And also, when you allow employees the ability to find the best way according to their own skill set and according to their experience, to be able to carry out the work in the best way that they are able to possible, it certainly looks to better engagement. People are more connected to the job that they do. And there's a better sense of appreciation that your knowledge and skills are actually being valued, as opposed to having to follow, a very detailed checklist that kind of crushes any innovation. We try and ensure that any knowledge, skills, and abilities are worded in a way that's inclusive and avoids barriers to candidates. We also look at trying to think ahead about how we're going to assess these knowledge, skills, and abilities as we go through our recruitment process. We want to look at good assessments. So good assessments have to be able to be administered consistently and allow candidates to be able to demonstrate their skills and knowledge. And one of my frustrations is you see job ads out there, and then when candidates go for an interview, they're not assessed on half of the things that actually are in the job ad. And there's candidates who were discouraged from applying because of all of those extra things that were thrown into the job ad, because maybe that reflects the organization's perspective of an ideal candidate. But it discouraged potentially qualified people from applying because they didn't meet every specific little item on that list. So encourage employers not to post anything that they don't plan to assess. If it's not essential to assess in making a hiring decision, then it doesn't belong in your recruitment process. We also, in preparation for screening, and one of the things that was talked about earlier today was the idea about equivalency. We want to make sure that we're identifying really what those minimum requirements are to be able to do the job and what a true equivalency would be. When we screen applications, we do look beyond what's listed in terms of formal education and in terms of formal experience. And we've actually encouraged candidates to tell us about how they're going to be able to do the job based on the comparable or transferable skills that they've developed outside of the workplace or school. In assessing candidates, a lot of organizations just screen however many resumes they get, choose a few among those to interview applicants. Interviews are still one of the primary methods of assessment we use, but we've made a bit of a shift to look at more behavior-focused interviews. And we're also trying to look at designing assessment methods that simulate the key functions of the position, where candidates have the ability to demonstrate that they have the skills and abilities required for the job, as opposed to telling us that they have the skills and abilities required to do the job. And I'm not sure how many of you may have had the experience where there are some people who do an excellent job of representing themselves in an interview. You know, you come out of there thinking, wow, this person's amazing. But when it comes to actually being able to do the job, maybe there's a little bit of a gap between what you saw in the interview and what you saw in actual job performance.
Can you give an example of a simulation?
An example of a simulation? One of them, for example, we employ a number of heavy equipment operators. So instead of doing a normal interview when we ask them, you know, what kinds of equipment have you operated, et cetera, or what would go into your normal pre-trip inspection, we actually ask them, you know what, here's a loader, here's a grader. Take us through what you would look at the pre-trip inspection. So we're also being able to identify that they know the key pieces that they need to look at as part of a pre-trip inspection, and that way they can identify them on that particular piece of equipment. And then when we actually do an assessment of their operating skills, so we're not relying on what the candidate describes as what their operating skills are, we're actually asking them to practically demonstrate that. The other piece is good use of probationary periods. Many different jurisdictions do have an allowance for some form of probationary period, depending if you're in a collective agreement. Many collective agreements will also reference probationary periods. Probationary periods are an opportunity for both the employer and the new employee to make an assessment in terms of, is this a good fit? On many occasions, what we see is that employers have reached the end of the probationary period or a couple of days after that probationary period end and say, well, you know what, maybe this isn't a good fit after all, or wait, we have all of these performance concerns, what can we do? What I encourage our hiring managers is to look at is really considering the probationary period as an extension of that selection process by which you selected that candidate. So this is an opportunity for them to demonstrate on the job that they have and are able to perform the key functions and lead to the key outcomes of that position. I mean, as an employer, it's not just like you throw the employee onto the job and it's, you know, sink or swim. It's more so you provide a good orientation and onboarding. You give them the tools and the support so that they are able to succeed. But this is a period of time that allows you to make an assessment with a lower threshold. And if the decision is that an employee doesn't have the skills to be able to perform that job, it's better to make that assessment and end it at that point rather than years down the road when someone finally brings to attention the employee that, you know what, this actually isn't working out. Barriers, and we talk about how there is a number of different barriers to candidates. I'm just going to go through a couple of them. Credential barriers are things that I'm sure that you're quite familiar with, requiring a particular degree or registration with a professional association when it isn't required by law for that profession. Also on the credential side, we also have seen, and it's interesting how it's changing in Canada versus the US. In the United States, we've seen kind of a credential creep where jobs where you used to have an associate degree or no degree now require that associate degree. Jobs that required an associate degree now require a bachelor's degree. Jobs that required a bachelor's degree now require a master's degree. And you're seeing increasingly jobs requiring PhDs. But not with necessarily that good consideration as to how someone with that degree is going to be able to perform on that job and perform more successfully in that job. So one of the challenges that we make to our hiring managers is saying, what is that education going to do? What skills and abilities is that person going to bring as a result of completing that degree that they can't acquire elsewhere or can't have acquired through other means? So if they're saying that someone can reasonably acquire a certain set of skills and knowledge critical for the job through a specific degree program, we also challenge them to look at what true equivalencies might be for that. On the experiential side, asking for a number of years of experience, Canadian experience, recent experience. Again, we try to look at focusing on what those transferable skills are. And how could someone have attained the skills without having necessarily a specific kind of experience? And years of experience is something that's always frustrated me, because really we should be looking at quality of experience as opposed to the volume of experience. You have individuals who may have been 10 years in a specific field, but they've been doing the same thing, every day for the last 10 years. They may not have the same breadth and depth and complexity of experience as someone who may have been in a different role for a considerably less period of time. So you might actually be getting a candidate who has the potential to perform less well by setting an unreasonable threshold in terms of years of experience. And years of experience are a particular challenge to new people who are entering the job market, and particularly frustrating when it's related to those things that you could reasonably learn on the job within the first couple of weeks. And then what we've seen, and maybe this is a trend as well, more so in some parts of Canada, is when people aren't successful in connecting to the job market in a way that they feel that their skills and knowledge are being valued, they go back to school to pursue an advanced degree, hoping that that's going to be able to help position them better for that job that they really want to have. Circumstantial is really looking at not allowing a job requirement to be satisfied from a variety of means, and one of my favorite examples for this is driver's licenses. How many jobs are a driver's license actually required? A lot of organizations will say, you know what, you have to have a minimum driver's license, but really what they're looking at is they're looking for candidates who have the ability to travel, the ability to go to various sites at various times with various frequency. So what we challenge our hiring managers to look at is really focusing on what is the essential piece. The essential piece is that they're able to attend various sites. And increasingly with technology, people have the opportunity to connect in ways that historically they wouldn't be able to without stepping a foot outside their door. So can we look at different methods and ways of achieving essentially the same goal? Knowledge, requiring knowledge, for example, of a specific policy, process, or sometimes it's a software system or tool internal to an organization. And the level. When the amount of experience or the level of a skill or ability requested is not proportional to the position, this is something that's frustrating, and sometimes I go through job ads, mostly for my own entertainment, because, and just a little bit later in this presentation, we'll go through some interesting examples, but where you're requiring the same level and type of, for example, like written communication skills. You're saying you need the same level of written communication skills for a senior policy analyst job as opposed to a job doing data entry. And the descriptor is the same and the method of assessment is the same and the threshold's the same. And does that necessarily make sense? Maybe you'd like someone who's able to to write formal academic or research papers, who is doing your data entry, but is that essential to the performance of the job? Most of the times, it's not. A couple other things that we look for and avoid is when recruiting to positions, avoiding the just like me bias. So recruiting to people to your organization who are just like you in terms of whatever academic achievements that you've had, in terms of whatever experience that you've had. It's something that you may not realize that you're unconsciously doing when you're looking to recruit people to your organization and consider them for positions. The other piece that's kind of an extension of that is that just like the previous incumbent kind of bias, where the previous incumbent was really good at their job and they had a specific skill set, they had a specific experience or education, and you figure if you're going to get a person who's just as good, you have to ask for the same thing. But that's not necessarily the case. So we're going to go through a quick little exercise where we're going to look at some very recent job postings to look at identifying some potential barriers. These are some postings in the last 2 weeks from major job sites. So this is the audience participation part of the session. This is Monday morning. I know that most of you, maybe it's the first, second, third cups of coffee. I don't know how awake you are, so I'm trying to keep you somewhat engaged as we go through. So this position that's posted is for an agronomic advisor. I'm assuming the text is big enough for most people to read, so I'm not going to read through it on your behalf. But I just like someone to volunteer to see if they can spot a barrier in this job ad. Absolutely. So the gentleman indicated that eligible for membership with a provincial institute. Is this a regulated profession? I don't believe so. And would they require a degree or a diploma to be registered as a member of the provincial institute? Do you want them to be members of the professional institute for networking, for a community of practice? Why are they asking for this requirement? Does anyone see any others? Absolutely, that's an excellent point. On one hand, they seem to be saying, we need someone who's technically sound, but then they're saying, well, you also need to have a degree or diploma. So are those mutually exclusive, which is why they've listed them twice? I hope not. I hope, our agronomy programs are preparing people to be technically sound profession. One of the interesting things looking at this qualification is, or related discipline plus equivalent work experience. So what are they looking at the end of the day? They haven't really articulated that very clearly. Another one that we see is minimum of 1 year of field and industry experience. Why 1 year? What are they looking for? What skills, knowledge, or abilities are they expecting people to have developed in that 1 year of field experience? And could they have articulated that differently as opposed to just saying 1 year of field experience? We have an environmental advisor at Fort McMurray. Just going a little bit more quickly through. They're looking at some experience in the environmental department of a large industrial facility. This is a pretty specific experience that they're looking for. So are there other environments that would allow candidates to obtain the required knowledge or skills? And what are you looking for candidates to have drawn from in some years of experience in an environmental department of a large industrial facility? Preference for a master's degree. Again, this is where we see that kind of credential creep happening. Has the organization articulated what additional value does the master's degree provide in relation to the position? Or is this just a way for them to be able to more easily screen the applications that come in? Field service tech and Kamloops. They have a requirement to service, rebuild, repair heavy-duty equipment as required. Trade certification for journeyman. This is probably something that's reasonable given that you're expecting someone to repair heavy equipment. I would prefer someone to have their journeyman certification or to be an apprentice under the supervision of a journeyman if they are carrying out a specific trade. One of the other pieces that we see is Microsoft Office appearing all over the place. Given that it's probably one of the most prevalent pieces of office software available, but unless there's something that is office specific for individuals to use, there's a lot of comparable software out there like OpenOffice, some of the Apple products as well. So people would be able to reasonably use Microsoft Office without issues. But again, this is something that could potentially be a barrier. Commercial insurance. This is one of my frustrations. Post-secondary education of any kind. Is this a degree, diploma, certificate? And what is the organization looking for someone to bring? Is it just that, they've demonstrated some sort of initiative in, further developing themselves, but could they do that through other ways other than just post-secondary education? 3 years of related office experience, again, kind of 3 years being an unreasonable barrier potentially. And what the heck is exposure? What does exposure mean? So these are two internal or industry-specific software programs. But how do you assess someone's exposure? Like, literally, I've seen the product, I've heard of the product, is that sufficient exposure? Or I've worked on related products. So again, employers not doing a great job of really articulating what they're looking for from candidates. IT auditor. SOX, or I'm assuming they're referencing Sarbanes-Oxley. I am not absolutely sure. I'm hoping that that's what they're referencing, but is it familiarity with it? Is it the ability to apply some of the requirements under that piece of legislation to your organization from an audit perspective? Or you just need to have heard the name at some point? Again, a couple of some very general terms that don't necessarily allow candidates to make an informed decision about whether they should be applying to your organization, if they do have the skills and abilities to apply for a position, and makes it also difficult from an employer to really look at doing a good, reliable, and comprehensive assessment of candidates. And just quickly, some legal assistant jobs. I'm just doing a quick comparison here. So on one hand, we're looking for applicants must be a graduate of a recognized legal administrative assistant program. Okay, with several years of litigation experience. Or we're looking at another organization taking a slightly different perspective in terms of a legal assistant diploma being an asset, but a combination of education and employment skills can be considered. At least this organization has taken a step to say, you know what, we're willing to consider some kind of equivalency. And again, falling down just a little bit in terms of advanced MS Office skills and requiring specific years of experience.
Maybe I'm anticipating, how better could they screen their candidates? Because if I'm looking at this, what if we end up having to interview 100 people based on more in-person practices? Are there more transparent, fair ways of screening people?
Well, there's a couple of different approaches. If you are being very specific, it does allow for better screening. So if you say post-secondary education, you're screening everyone in who has post-secondary education potentially, unless you're going to then start narrowing it based on what is more closely related to what the job requirements are. So why not say in the first place what exactly you are looking for? So what we find in an approach that we're trying to take is more clearly articulating really what the criteria are. So when you can provide that greater degree of specificity, it does allow for people to be able to better screen the applications, because you're not kind of saying, oh, well, you know, is a diploma okay? Is a degree okay? What are we doing here? I guess we have to include everyone. Being a little bit more clear and transparent, and it also helps applicants make a better informed decision. So you might be getting potentially more applicants, but hopefully you're also getting more qualified applicants. One promising practice that we've used as an organization is looking for people to do practicum, co-op placements, work experience, or volunteer placements with our organization. It's an excellent way for candidates to be able to demonstrate their skills and abilities in a real job environment and look to see if they're a good fit for the organization. And allows us to make an assessment before making a more permanent commitment. One of the ways that we've applied this or approached this is we do have a co-op program that we do jointly with the Red River College as well as the University of Manitoba, where engineering and engineering technology students are hired to perform engineering-related work like gravel surveying, gravel testing, surveying, working in a materials lab during the construction season under the supervision of either senior technical staff or professional engineers. And then we have the opportunity then to usually have them do different kinds of work experience during their 2 or more different co-op terms. And then when we have a competition, we have an opportunity to potentially restrict it to those individuals who have participated in the program, because we know that they have worked in our environment, they've been a good fit, they have the skills, knowledge, and abilities to be able to contribute to the organization. And the candidates have also had the opportunity to make that assessment, so we know that they're not going to be leaving us within the first 6 months because, you know, they didn't know what they were getting into. Newcomers to Canada in particular may have strong skills and knowledge in their field, and sometimes the only barrier for them to achieving recognition of their credentials and to be able to work in their profession is through work experience, that Canadian work experience that a number of those regulated professions require. And this is something that we've used from a recruitment perspective, because employers can help bridge that gap for those individuals by providing that relevant experience, which means that when those individuals achieve their professional designation or become certified as part of an organization, hopefully we've done our job. Hopefully they've enjoyed their experience working with us. And now well, I mean, government salaries in Manitoba being what they are, we're not certainly going to be able to recruit on the basis of pay. So hopefully we've sold them on the experience of working in the organization and the other benefits that we can offer to candidates. Another way of looking at applying some of the principles and philosophy of recognition of prior learning is through employee accommodation. Employers have a duty to accommodate, and they have a duty to accommodate to the point of undue hardship. Accommodations might be related to an individual's family status, it might be related to religion, and often it's related to people who may have a disability that requires accommodation as part of their position. Accommodation might require modification of existing job duties, reassignment to a different role potentially, provision of job support, sometimes it's even just a different schedule. But our first step is normally to take a step back when an employee approaches us with an accommodation request and look at, again, what are the essential work outcomes that this position is intended to achieve? And consider, are there alternative methods that we can use that are going to be able to still achieve the same outcomes, but just in a different way? When we look at alternative work assignments, it becomes increasingly important for us to look at the employee's skills and abilities before assigning them to another role. Because we want to make sure if we're assigning someone to a different job, we're assigning them to an area where they're going to be able to use their skills and abilities, they're going to be productive, they're going to be engaged, and ensuring that it's also meaningful work that's required by the organization. And one of the most important pieces is that assessment of employees' skills and abilities in going through that alternative work assessment process. Similar to the process that you may be familiar with workers' compensation boards, they will look at the whole of an employee's life experiences and skills to be able to determine where and how they may be able to return to work, especially if they're looking at the need for potentially some vocational training. So I just want to give you a couple of examples. We have many of our heavy equipment operators. It's a fairly physically demanding position. One individual sustained a permanent back injury and was no longer able to perform the physical requirements of the position. An assessment of their skills identified a strong knowledge of heavy equipment parts, and they also had some basic clerical skills. We ended up being able to make an assessment and successfully reassign them as a storekeeper in one of our heavy equipment repair facilities, where they're managing inventory and tracking incoming and outgoing work orders. And they're quite successful at the role because they have that knowledge of the parts, the systems, and they also have the knowledge when someone forgets to put an order in, they're able to say, wait a minute, you're planning to perform this particular repair, you forgot that belt, you forgot another piece of equipment or another part that might be required to complete it. So their expertise has actually been added more value to the organization than recruiting a traditional storekeeper who might just have that kind of inventory management background but may not have that product knowledge. We also are responsible for our provincial parks, and we had a park laborer who developed a permanent neck or back condition where they couldn't do the janitorial and maintenance related duties of the position. The assessment identified that they had experience running a small business a number of years ago, which had included customer service and bookkeeping. So we were able to successfully accommodate them in a role as a park attendant, handling all the campsite registrations, accepting payments, and to responding to inquiries by the individuals who are patrons of our provincial parks. Learning and development, this is really the learning and development. I don't think I have to sell you as to how recognition of prior learning necessarily connects into recognition of or learning and development in an organization. What we have found, though, is that as employers, we can save time and money by having a clearer picture of what an employee's skills and development needs are in relation to their current job or for their future career goals. And it can have a tremendous impact to an organization by doing so. The other piece is that formal education and training workshops shouldn't be the first or only consideration to build skills or to bridge gaps in employee development. And quite often, and maybe when I talk about performance management, the tendency is to say, there's a performance issue or there's a gap, let's get them to training. You know, we need to send them to a course. We need to send them to a workshop. But that's not necessarily the most effective way for someone to build the skill or develop the ability that we're looking for. And one of the things I noted towards the beginning of the presentation is Canada lags most of its economic peers in on-the-job and informal training. And this is an area where I think organizations at less cost than delivering traditional workshops or employees attending courses can help bridge some of those gaps. Employees have found we learn much more from informal methods like work experience. So we look at providing short-term secondment or reassignment opportunities to employees so that they can increase the breadth of their skills. Committee or project work is another way for employees to develop new skills and experience, partnering with other staff for mentoring, for coaching, for networking. And we also look at work outside of work. So a lot of individuals, especially in the civil service, I don't want to generalize, do a tremendous amount in their communities or a tremendous amount at home. So it might be operating a small business, it might be working with a community organization. People develop skills and are able to build those skills in different ways. So we want to recognize the learning and the experiences that people have outside of the traditional work environment as well. When we work with employees, I think I skipped ahead one extra here. When we work with employees with their learning and development plans, we look at what the goals are, but then we're looking at what are some of the different paths that can be used to help employees to achieve those goals. And there's some tremendous benefits from an organization for taking this approach to using more informal learning within an organization. Looking at our own demographics within the Manitoba government, we're looking at a workforce where about 40% of our senior managers are eligible to retire in the next 5 years. We're looking at, thankfully, the retirement rate has been low enough, so we haven't quite seen that tidal wave of retirements happen, but we're also looking at a workforce where over a quarter of our workforce will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years as well. So across an organization of 15,000 employees, we're looking at what could be a tremendous knowledge gap where people with all of this knowledge and skills could be walking out of the organization. So benefits of informal learning also benefits us as an organization because we're able to look at transfer of knowledge from more experienced employees to newer employees and vice versa, and be able to connect some of key projects and initiatives to employees' own development and learning goals. And to allow, and government's kind of infamous for this, working in silos. When we are allowing opportunities for employees to work outside of the traditional boundaries of their branch, their division, their department, we're allowing that transfer of knowledge and the sharing of knowledge and expertise across the organization, which benefits everyone. So we do have a learning policy, and this learning policy is pretty general in terms of policies goes. Essentially, the expectation is that every employee will have a learning plan. So this learning plan doesn't have to be a very complicated thing. It's a fairly simple thing. But the goal is really to promote continuous learning and puts an emphasis on informal learning as a way to develop skills. We try to look at that 80-20 balance, where 80% of the learning that employees are looking to achieve is to be achieved through those informal methods, whereas 20% are looking at more formal methods in terms of workshops, courses, etc. So the other piece is if you have in-house training, think about how you can factor in employees' past learning. So we're trying to follow some of the practices that are used by some of the leading educational institutions where they recognize employees' past learning and skills. If an employee has obtained knowledge or skills through having taken similar training or through experience, we can recognize that, whether based on a curriculum assessment or based on more of a kind of informed interview assessment of the individual. And if their learning is found to be comparable to someone who has completed the course, they can receive credit without the need for actually formally going through that program. And that certainly does result in some cost savings to us as an employer. The other piece is if there's gaps or differences between the content learned by the employee, we may be able to customize or to focus that training. So instead of sitting through a 2-day session to go over that one concept that you can learn in an hour, we focus on that one concept instead of making employees necessarily go through the whole course content. The other piece, our in-house training branch, we call it Organization and Staff Development because we love big names, bureaucratic names, and acronyms in government, so also known as OSD. We offer a number of in-house certificate programs, and one of the ways we've also tried to connect RPL is with a number of the educational institutions in Manitoba. We do have articulation agreements where completion of a number of our in-house courses and workshops are recognized as elective credits by the University of Winnipeg, University of Manitoba, as well as Red River College. And that is tremendous for some of our adult learners who, again, have this learning and their organization is recognizing it. And now educational institutions are also recognizing it if they're looking to pursue a formal program at some point in their career. This is something that we find is just so important is if you value and you recognize the skills and abilities that your employees have already obtained, it's incredible versus saying, well, I'm sorry, but you haven't formally achieved this, so we can't recognize that. It's so demotivating for an employee, especially when you're saying, well, you know what, you're going to have to spend a week training so that you can have the formal certification to be able to know and do something you already know and know how to do. So this is just a quick example of what our learning plan template is. Really simple, what the learning goals are, what the development activities will be in support of that, what are the timeframes, and how are you going to measure success. Really simple. The important part is actually not so much that this document gets completed, though, is that there is that discussion between the employee and their supervisor about what their goals are and how potentially to achieve them. The other piece, and I think there's some really good topics this week about assessment, and learning plans and the application of them are really only as good as the assessment that takes place, whether that's the self-assessment that's done by your employees or your learners, the assessment by the supervisor based on what they've observed based on their performance. Sometimes it's also through external assessment. So good assessment techniques I mean, we've talked about them being important for recruitment. They're very important for learning and development and accommodation, and we'll also talk about that relating to performance. I'm just going to do a quick time check. Can someone advise me what time we currently have? All right. Okay, so we have a fairly small group here today. So I was going to do that awful facilitator thing where I was going to get you all into small groups, then you share your experiences, then you report back to the bigger group. Instead, I'm just going to consider you to be one group, and hopefully we can do this relatively informally. And I'm very curious as to, and maybe let's just start with a show of hands. How many of your organizations hire people based on a paper screening of a traditional resume and an interview? Do some of your organizations also use non-traditional application processes like the use of portfolios, video resumes? I'm hearing a lot about badges. Okay, we've got a couple in the room. And I already mentioned earlier today the challenges with the people who look really good on paper, the people who do really well in the interview and don't do so well on the job. That's partly a gap in your assessment processes. So what I'm going to ask you to kind of share with the group and share your expertise is to talk about if you were recruiting to fill your own position, what assessment approach would you use? I'm really interested in hearing some of your ideas. Mm-hmm. So you'd be looking for them to directly apply what they'd be doing as part of their job. Okay, great.
I'd be looking at similar outputs
Mm-hmm.
that produce deliverables. So I would be wanting to look at their deliverables and
Mm-hmm.
talk about what role they play in producing those deliverables. And I would also want to say, is there anybody who would recommend you, anybody who's working with?
Yeah, great. See some people avoiding eye contact.
So I'd be looking at case studies to say how would you educate learners versus go through the process of
That's a great example. I just mentioned case studies as being one of the approaches where you're taking a realistic scenario of something that they'd be required to do as part of the job, and then you ask them essentially, how would you manage the situation, or how would you essentially address it in its various steps? That's a great approach. Then I guess taking another look at assessment, how would you assess, and maybe this connects into the theme of the conference talking about quality assurance as well, how would you assess performance for your own position? When I'm looking at performance, let's say that you've been successfully employed in an organization for a period of time, and a good part of whether it's learning development or just kind of performance management, and not seeing performance management in a negative context necessarily, but more so in terms of the process of setting goals and measuring achievement of those goals. How do you measure that, or how would you measure that for your particular roles? Oh, from... Okay. So when you mention results, what kind of results would you be looking for?
We're looking for results, when we do an assessment or a performance review, we set up goals, objectives, let's say 1 year, 6 months, whatever, and then, we would look at results from these goals.
So definitely looking at setting objectives, and then looking at measuring the progress or the accomplishment of those objectives.
Something I've seen is scorecards, and it's like a sort of four-way scorecard of how, where you were looking for performance and where you ended up, and sometimes there's color coding with that. In other words, making it a little more visual rather than just words on a page.
Definitely. When we're looking at performance management, and it's interesting how a number of organizations have completely turned performance management on its head, where in some cases it's all about the discussions, it's about the goal setting, the measuring progress, providing feedback, and essentially just continuing that cycle. Some organizations like Adobe, for example, have the no performance review, essentially, where they have tossed all of the paper, that awful once a year exercise where you get sat down and you go through, what you've done this year. In some cases, employees, it would be the first time that they've heard any feedback from their manager. Hopefully, it's not the only time that that has been the case, but, you hear of it happening. And focus more so on ensuring that there's a regular cycle of feedback and discussion throughout the course of the year. Because if there is an issue, if there's a problem, wouldn't you rather identify it and correct it as early as possible and give the person a chance to improve, rather than waiting 6 months, 8 months down the road to say, by the way, yeah, that report that you developed really just didn't meet the expectation, and then you're sitting there thinking, well, you know what, I've developed 6 reports since that date, so I've got 6 reports that never met the expectation, and maybe if someone gave me some more timely feedback, I'd be able to do something about that. So what we try to encourage through performance management is, first of all, the periodic review as it relates to the position outcomes. The other piece is that while the performance expectations and the goals should be clear, so that there's a good understanding of what those are, that there should be flexibility in terms of the methods that are being used to achieve those goals, unless there is a regulatory requirement to go and use a certain specific procedure. Same thing when we're talking about learning and development in terms of plans to address any performance gaps, is looking at, can we do things instead of just sending someone to a course or sending someone to training, because obviously that's going to fix the behavior, is looking at, are there better ways? And are there better ways that they can do this on the job, whether it's through a specific assignment, whether it's through mentoring, whether it's through a buddy that they might be able to work with, or the provision of sometimes some job supports or tools. So I just wanted to finish up by talking about the Career Gateway program, and I just realized that I was a little bit remiss this morning that when accepting the award for this program, I probably should have said something about it. It is a program that we started in 2005 that focuses on external job seekers from employment equity groups, so focusing on, initially the focus was on visible minorities, but the program has grown to also include Aboriginal as well as persons with a disability. The goal is to place people with relevant skills and abilities into jobs across the Manitoba government through trial placements as well as referral of candidates for vacant positions. And I know initially, and it's the easiest way, is essentially, well, let's slot people into entry-level positions, but we wanted to do something different with this program and instead focus on professional, technical, difficult to recruit jobs that are really going to add value to the organization and really capitalize on some of the skills that are available out there. So we have, on average, about 2,000 people applying to join our Career Gateway program inventory on an annual basis. And we're usually able to place approximately 65, sometimes up to 80 people through referrals or through placements to departments each year. And so essentially how the program works is we have a number of positions with limited funding available, and what we'll do is part of it involves departments coming to us because we've built quite the reputation for having an inventory of very skilled candidates, but also we do some more, we do market candidates as well to departments where we know that they may have an opportunity or a gap based on their demographics, based on some of their vacancies. So what we'll do is say, you know what, we'll provide funding for the first few months, so maybe first up to 3 months, and then we'll provide an unfunded position for the remainder of the year. And the departments essentially then take on the salary costs for the remainder of the year. So departments, with the financial and resource pressures that governments are facing, I mean, everyone loves free salary dollars and everyone loves a position, especially if you have some limitations in the positions that you're able to fill. And initial participation was great, and our concern when we initiated the program is that departments would, sign on, they'd accept the person for the initial period of time, and, and after those first 3 months had elapsed, to be like, okay, thank you for your service, we'll see you later. What has been incredible is the uptake, and I think I'm going to reference this a little bit later in the presentation, but this feels like a better fit now, is where we've had an over 90% attachment rate, where program participants have been successfully appointed to full-time positions in government, in professional, technical, and other more senior roles in government. In some cases, departments don't even wait for the year of the position being available to appoint individuals because they see the skills that these individuals have brought to the organization. So one of the critical pieces or the success factors for this program has been good assessment. Once a candidate has applied to the program, proper assessment is really essential in terms of being able to match them with the right employment opportunity. So we do look at using some of these RPL principles in assessing candidates. So it might be looking at stuff like work samples that demonstrate their ability. It might also involve practical demonstrations where possible, consideration of academic thesis work, reports, articles, for example, that they may have published. Trying to use more behavioral or situation-based kinds of questions where you're asking them to demonstrate the skills that they actually have as opposed to making, a general presentation about their experience or qualifications overall. And one of the other success factors is that we don't, well, we probably could sit back and wait for these skilled candidates to come to our doors, that we go out and we actively seek them. We have a pretty aggressive outreach program where we connect with community organizations, serving, for example, the persons with a disability community, organizations serving newcomers to Canada. We go to career fairs. We use past participants as our ambassadors, essentially going out to different organizations so that they can share their successes and that they're a little bit more relatable than, someone from HR coming and saying, hey, do we have the opportunity for you? So just a couple of placement examples that I wanted to share. And this ties into some of the discussion that was yesterday about the use of alternative pathways for newcomers to Canada, where people are in transition. There may be a period of time between recognition of their professional credentials. And we've been able to use this idea of alternative pathways to keep people in related employment as they work towards these kind of opportunities. So for example, we did have an architect who was trained abroad and didn't have that Canadian experience, and they had been looking for work for just over a year and a half related to their field and had been unsuccessful. As part of the assessment, we looked at samples of the designs they had built and the projects they had worked on, provide confirmation of the skills that they had. We were able to, in the short term, find placement as a project manager with our group responsible for housing and community development. That initial placement was successful. They were, the department, I think, recruited them permanently within the first 3 months, which is unusual. And they're now working permanently in a role as an architect within the organization. So this is one of those examples where we invest in the candidates, we support them through the process of getting their professional accreditation, and that builds that connection and builds that loyalty. They're more likely to stay with the organization at the end of the day. We have a policy analyst. They were a forester in their country of origin, and they had some medical limitations regarding their ability to do field work, so we needed to look at some alternative opportunity. On assessment, we found that they had policy writing and research skills that they had developed working for a nonprofit organization during their period of seeking but not yet finding related employment in Canada. We were able to first match them with a job related to environmental compliance, and then moved into a placement with our Department of Conservation into a policy analysis role where they're able to apply their skills and their knowledge working with forestry-related policy. Engineers, and we have a great partnership with the University of Manitoba with their Internationally Educated Engineers Qualification Recognitions Program, or IEEQ as the shorter version, where we had an engineer who was trained and registered abroad. They were going through the qualifications recognition process, and one of the requirements for them to obtain their PEng in Manitoba was to get Canadian experience. So in the short term, we were able to place them in a technical engineering role that required them to be doing engineering-related work, but that doesn't require a specific designation. And the great thing is that they were able to use this experience because it was engineering-related work under the supervision of a professional engineer. They were able to use that towards the hours required to obtain their certification. They have now become a professional engineer, and they're working as an engineer within our organization. One of the other pieces is, support and development that are provided to employees through the duration of their placements. And that's something that our panelists spoke about as well this morning, how important it is to have people that you can connect to and that are there to support you. And some of the supports that we have built into the program, we do have some training, and we try to use kind of a cohort approach where we're bringing together similar people who might be joining the organization at similar times, so people can start forging connections outside of their immediate work unit as well. Providing a connection to a workplace buddy, and we find that this buddy system can be invaluable as a person that you can approach when you have those questions where you're not quite comfortable approaching your supervisor because you don't want your supervisor to lose confidence in your ability to do the job. And this buddy is able to answer those kind of workplace and day-to-day related questions that you might not be comfortable. Maybe it's because of cultural sensitivity regarding the power relationships, but it gives you an opportunity to have those questions answered and that support provided in a way that works for you and works to the betterment actually of the organization. And also some element of career coaching as well. So we don't profess to be the experts, so we have connected with organizations community organizations like Manitoba Start, to help advise people through their progress, whether it's their progress looking to achieve professional recognition of their qualifications, or part of another career pathing exercise. We do look to where there is also expertise and don't assume that we know everything ourselves. We started a new pilot just recently with Manitoba Jobs and the Economy to help people who are in receipt of employment and income assistance to find employment. One of the big goals is essentially to look at increasing the workforce attachment of individuals receiving EIA. And so we're using the same kind of approach where people who were receiving training through EIA related to their building on their considerable lifetime of experiences and knowledge, trying to find placements in related occupations. So the goal wasn't necessarily for them to find permanent employment in government per se, but it was providing work experience that they could use then to better position themselves to be able to successfully compete for opportunities, whether it's in the private sector, with other like the nonprofit organizations, as well as potentially positions in the public sector as well. So this is an ongoing program. It initially had been focused on single mothers as individuals who had particular challenges and barriers trying to join the workforce, given some of the financial and other restrictions associated with being part of the EIA program. There wasn't necessarily much of an incentive for people to join the workforce, and there's actually some pretty significant barriers. So looking at trying to eliminate those barriers so that people were able to seek employment and be able to obtain employment that was going to financially and economically be able to help people move from being in receipt of social assistance to actually contributing from a taxpayer side of things. So our program was recognized by the Manitoba Prior Learning Network in 2012 with their Pearl Award, and very proud that today the program was also recognized by CAPLA. The success rate of over 90% has been something that has been in part due to the excellent work of our program coordinators, the work that they've done in assessing the candidates, but it has also been due to the incredible skills that the candidates have brought to the organization. And initially, the program faced some challenges because a lot of hiring managers, well, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, several hiring managers had a perception that equity candidates and qualified candidates were disparate groups, that there wasn't necessarily going to be any overlap. And we had been able to demonstrate through this program and through word of mouth and through direct experience that there's individuals that that might be coming from underrepresented groups that do have the skills, abilities, and knowledge to be able to make a valuable contribution to the organization. One of the other pieces that we have seen is that our program participants, and we have somewhere over approaching 350 now, where program participants are now in senior roles in the organization so that they're able to actively endorse and also encourage the use of these kinds of placements and referrals to their organization. So we've seen the success essentially almost organically grow through people having positive experiences and essentially telling a friend and sharing it themselves. So I wanted to, just kind of in closing, continue to challenge yourselves, but also challenge the employers in your areas, challenge employers in the industries where your clients may be connecting to look at new and creative ways for employees to be able to, or prospective employees to be able to demonstrate and develop the skills they need to be successful at work. Because we have found that the use of some of these RPL principles to remove barriers has allowed the attraction of better qualified and larger applicant pools. It's led to the selection of higher performing employees and has really supported employee growth, development, and engagement. So just some questions, and this presentation is also going to be available at the conference website, so the slides are something you don't have to be taking notes. Some quick questions I'd like you to take away, whether it's for your own organizations or for employers that you're looking to connect to, is looking at, do job descriptions focus on the desired work outcomes and allow for different ways of achieving them? Do job advertisements and recruitment methods exclude or include qualified candidates? Do recruitment and other assessment methods effectively assess knowledge, skills, and abilities? Would work performed with the organization lend itself to potential co-op, practicum, or other kinds of work experience placements? When employees are being accommodated, are their skills and abilities being considered? Does your learning and development framework consider and value employee prior learning? Is learning and development in your organization encouraged through informal as well as formal approaches? And this is something I really find interesting talking to people with universities and colleges where, on one hand, from a student's perspective, they embrace these principles, but from an employment perspective, they don't necessarily to the same degree. And does your performance management framework allow for different methods of achieving key job outcomes? So, with whatever remaining time we have, I'd like to turn things over to any questions, any discussion, any points anyone would like to share.
Really enjoyed this presentation. Basically talking about why it makes sense. I'm wondering, I think government is an early adopter on this. I think it's natural. I'm wondering, do you have any statistics, visuals, statistics or whatever graphs that show the ROI that appeal to other employers?
We do have some internal stats that we can look at sharing. As an organization, we haven't directly tracked costs associated with recruitment or directly tracked costs associated with the costs of poor performance or the costs of learning development, but there are a number of measures that we can certainly look at, especially as it relates to turnover in organizations. There's a lot of metrics out there that we can certainly connect to. The other piece is if you can convince employers to give you that one chance, if you have a candidate that you think might be able to be a good fit for an organization, and if they can be successful, that's the best way. And definitely demonstrating the business case is one approach, and demonstrating through success is certainly another one that can be successful. All right, I know we're coming right up on lunch. So I wanted to thank everyone for their participation today and for joining me. And I hope to see you through sessions later on this afternoon and tomorrow.